the next keynote address, which is on blockchain education, ecosystems, and socioeconomic impact. We have with us Professor Lisa Short, the founder, mind-shifting co-founder, PNL Digital Edge Limited, Director, Africa Agri-Tech Limited, UK, Africa, and Australia. Well, Professor Lisa is a preeminent design, ecosystem thinker, and a digital technologist. Well, she's one of the top 100 B2B thought leaders and women in crypto in the world to follow in 2020. And she also comes amongst the top 50 global thought leaders and influencers on EdTech. So thank you so much, Professor Lisa, for joining us and giving us your valuable time. Over to you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone in the UAE, Dubai. Afternoon to everyone in Africa and to the UK. It's evening here in Australia, so welcome. A really great pleasure to be here and to be able to talk through some of these really important topics around blockchain. There's been some fascinating conversations that have been held today already. My session is going to be around blockchain education. And it is an area that I'm extremely passionate about, because unless we can shift the minds of the very large majority of the populace around the world to get deployment of blockchain solutions, we can have as many conferences as we like, but we aren't getting advancement. So it's a really key topic area. And one that's certainly very dear to my heart, and certainly one that is economically wise to have as well. So sit back and enjoy, and hopefully I will shift a few minds and open a few minds in terms of what education has to offer for blockchain. Just got to be able to move. There we go. First question I like to ask generally is, blockchain education. I was asked in last year, middle of last year, it seems like an eternity ago with the current circumstances, to deliver some strategy to the UK government with regards to blockchain and education in Westminster Parliament. And when I did that, I think they assumed that the presentation that I would give would be around how blockchain could be used within the educational institutions to improve their processes and so forth. And we could talk about credentialing, and we can talk about efficiency gains and cost reductions and so forth. But I actually didn't do that. I actually broke the conversation down into three parts. And I do like to talk about that when I actually talk about blockchain and education. The first area that I spoke about was the business of education. How can blockchain and distributed ledger technologies profoundly impact the way that the business of education runs? In other words, the educational institutions, the universities, the schools, the colleges, how can they be more efficient? How can they issue credentials on a blockchain? How can they use that technology to empower learning and assessment strategies and so forth? That is one area of blockchain and education. The second part, though, is about how we can use blockchain to manifestly change education and move it into a new paradigm. So how, for example, can we tokenize learning so that learners can get paid to learn? How can we shift the way we deliver education? How can we create new paradigms around education and its delivery and shift it from being broadcast education to being a different style of education that impacts in the 21st century? That's the second area. But the third area, and I believe at the current time, the most important, is education about blockchain and frontier technologies, because blockchain also doesn't operate and exist in a silo. But unless we can actually deliver education about blockchain and get people to understand what it is, reduce the fears, get our leaders educated, and the very large number of people that have no knowledge of what it actually can do, unless we can change that, we'll have trouble moving forward. So I always like to ask this question, are we on a vertical learning curve, or are we on a cliff edge? Are we so afraid of it that we're about to stand on the edge and jump off and go, oh, it's all too hard? Or are we to the point where we really are going to embrace it and start to have that really robust climb up what we think is a very, very steep learning curve? And of course, in terms of COVID-19 and what's happened in the last 6 months, without a doubt, the appetite for change from blockchain technologies and what it can do has manifestly changed. There has been a complete shift in the appetite, the desire for, the understanding of, and the initiation of projects to deliver blockchain solutions around the world. People are looking for ways to be more efficient, to pivot their businesses, to ensure that we can be part of the digital world and the digital framework. And we've heard a number of conversations about GovTech, Trade Tech, FinTech, and so forth. All of those have been on a very steep learning curve. But I want to raise some points around some areas that potentially most people haven't thought about. Just some facts. Education accounts for 50% of economic growth everywhere in the world. Every dollar that we put into education accounts for 50% of the growth that we have in the economy globally. Secondly, the most important thing, the technology adaptation remains a challenge for the sector that is 99% of all businesses globally, and that's the small to medium enterprise sector. Now, I did hear a presentation earlier refer to that and ask one of the questions, how can we adopt blockchain technology solutions and deployment of those solutions to empower the small to medium enterprise market? And bear in mind that the SME, or the small to medium enterprise market, is not what most people think. It is not just the mum and dad businesses and the 1 and 2 people. They are the multi-million-dollar businesses that are out there that are still struggling with adaptation of technology from 10 years ago. Many of them haven't converted to be able to embrace data and cloud technologies, let alone take on the changes and the challenges of blockchain technology. But I want you to consider those two facts together. 50% of our economic growth rests on education, and we've got 99% of all our businesses in the economy cannot adapt to technology and digital strategy and blockchain as we know it. That is a massive market and opportunity that's being missed and lost in our current situation. So just to give you a bit of an idea, 1% increase in what government and the world spend on education increases our global domestic product, our GDP, by between 0.1 and 0.3%. And that depends on emerging economies, whether it's male, female education and so forth. And in fact, we have the most impact in the developing nations, of which Africa is 17% of the entire global population. So just think about that. 1% increase in our government spending increases global GDP by between 0.1 and 0.3%, and it also increases the growth of our GDP by 0.2%. They are quite dramatic figures based on just one input to our economy. Not technology, just straight education. Now, if you want to look at it in terms of ROI, return on investment, and I know there's a lot of people here that are looking to invest in blockchain technologies and blockchain solutions, need to look at it in light of this. The global return on investment for education is between 10 to 16%. The social return on investment, so in other words, impact, particularly into developing nations, for education is between 18 to 26%. Most importantly, girls have a higher ROI for education, and it sits at 18% compared to boys, which sits at 14%. Now, just look at those figures. we're talking 18 to 26% ROI, 10 to 16% ROI. Tell me some of the traditional investments or even blockchain investments in cryptocurrency assets and stablecoins and tokenized assets that have had that level of return on an investment. Treasury bonds, stocks, shares, assets do not and have not returned that degree of ROI ever. Currently, even now in the last 12 months, the return on Bitcoin and some of the highest performing crypto assets have not returned that degree of ROI. And yet for 1% increase in education spend, we know that these are some of the figures that we're seeing. So these are the starting points that we're looking at. Now, I have heard this talked about today as well. PWC yesterday released their new report, Time for Trust report. And they talked about blockchain technology boosting global GDP by $1.76 trillion by 2030, just through the implementation and deployment of what they believed were current projects and projected projects in the next remaining 9 to 10 years. 1.76 trillion US dollars. Let's go back to those figures I mentioned before. If 1% of the 99% of the global economy, the SMEs, were educated, in other words, we gave the boost to global GDP that we know is returned from education, we would get an additional $1.42 trillion added to GDP. So 1.79 million without education, just through the deployment of blockchain solutions that are known by PWC, and through another 1% of just education. That's only 1%, $1.42 trillion. There's a huge opportunity that's missed there. I'm going to raise some points too about the PWC report that highlights how manifestly great this can exponentially increase. Because in that report on page 17, this is the page that calculated that $1.79 trillion increase in GDP. And my question is, where's Africa? We've got a situation here where every one of those figures is totally devoid of one of the biggest economies we have in the globe, where 17% of the world live, and it has not been articulated in that 1.79 trillion alleged GDP growth from blockchain technology, and nor anywhere in that report has any credence been given to any additional spend on education about blockchain to deploy and understand it and move it forward. And yet 1% of 99% of the market will actually generate almost as much GDP growth as what all of this here that you can see, and it has excluded Africa. It's quite a profound deficiency in that report, and I believe shows a complete lack of understanding and education about the global market and the impact of blockchain education and understanding globally. If people can't understand, they can't participate. If people who lead our nations and set the rules don't understand blockchain, they can't make good decisions. And yet we currently do not have an international or a national strategy in any country in the world for education about blockchain and what it can do for business, how it can empower businesses, how it can reduce costs, how it can improve efficiency, how it can give provenance of product, how we can actually use it for a digital ID, how we can engage with GovTech, how we can engage with FinTech. without a strategy to roll out specifically education about blockchain and its incredible potential to grow the economy, how can we expect to gain the GDP growth that has been suggested if we are not putting investment into education about blockchain technologies and how distributed ledger technologies and cryptocurrencies and all the projects that we have will manifestly change the economy? How can we expect that growth? How can we expect our leaders of our countries, if they don't understand blockchain technology, to be making the right decisions for the world economy? I'm going to use two examples that's happened this past week. The UK's Financial Conduct Authority has banned crypto derivative trading and exchange traded notes to retail investors from the 1st of January 2021. Their belief is that it is too high a risk for the general public who are uneducated to be able to gain and benefit from derivative trading from crypto assets. Instead of saying, why don't we invest in education, that 1%, and manifestly put another $1.42 trillion into the economy, they've banned it instead. So instead of thinking education, they've thought banning it. And that's partly driven by fear of leadership and lack of understanding of what blockchain technologies can do. The second big event that I want to mention is the US Cryptocurrency Act of 2020. And it just sort of slid in underneath the radar as well, while we've all been oblivious to what's been going on. And again, that piece of legislation focuses on punitive crime and AML or anti-money laundering requirements rather than potential. And yet at the same time, there was no education on areas like the HSBC, Westpac Bank, Commonwealth Bank, Wirecard, who've all blatantly been mainstream providers who've fraudulently been fined for being fraudulent and failing on AML requirements. And yet these reports have come through exhibiting fear about blockchain technologies, and they could have been overcome by education. The flow on from these two events sends a message to the broader population that there's something wrong with blockchain and we need to fear it, rather than giving positive education about the blockchain technologies and what their potentials actually are. So blockchain is not spelt Bitcoin. It's not too hard. Why do I need to care? Lots of reasons, apart from the fact that it's a high investment opportunity for the global economy. You don't need to be the person who knows how to code blockchain, but you do need to know about the type of systemic changes it can affect. As every individual in the economy, you need to know the industries it can disrupt. You need to know how it will disrupt and pivot your industry and your business. You need to know, and to do that, you need to be educated. Quite a profound statement that was made that's shown on the screen down here from the European Commission. In today's economy, there is less and less time to build trust, and we've all been identified in that case, certainly in the last 6 months in the virtual world that we're playing in, than has ever happened in the past before. To fight cancer, to balance renewable energy, to trace the authenticity of goods, actors must be able to trust one another without meeting face to face. And what's that? That's blockchain. But unless we can overcome the lack of trust in a trustless technology, how will we advance and deploy its potentials? And that's a profound dichotomy that we're in. I just want to demonstrate this here, and this goes into, and I am highlighting Africa here, and the ecosystems that are impacted by the use and the understanding of education in blockchain. If, for example, we were to be able to deploy a sovereign digital identity identity for every single unbanked person who is not financially included in the African economy, and that will happen through education. They would then have access to digital learning because they can be financially included, because unless you are banked and have financial inclusion, you can't pay for an education, you therefore can't get an education. So if you get an ID, self-sovereign digital ID using blockchain technologies, you can access education, you can be financially included, you can start to use the digital economy and digital currencies. You can start to build a portfolio of 21st century skills and capacity for businesses and SMEs, and you can take the economy from being fragmented to connected, to included, to thinkers and doers. And that's just by starting with a self-sovereign digital ID and education. Nothing else. How can we expect, and these are some of the projects that I'm currently involved in, and most of these have evolved, moved forward, and made incredible progress in the last 6 months since we've gone to this virtual learning curve and virtual world that we're in. Africa Agritech is an extraordinary program where we're using blockchain technologies to create trust metrics that allows autonomous decision-making in the agri supply chain. DistiChain, a UAE-based company that is using blockchain to empower SMEs to join the global trade network. Pure Vision Learning, based out of Nigeria, all of its learning infrastructure is built on blockchain. GMEX Group, they're empowering fintech across the ECOWAS region of Western Africa, where they've been trying to get a single digitalized currency. Swissborg, using education to empower community about wealth and inclusion. But unless we can educate the majority of people and let them know about these potentials, how will they know to be included? How will they be able to be included unless we focus a strategy on global education around blockchain technologies? So I'm just going to finish this because I'm aware of the time, that although I've talked this presentation, and I deliberately wanted to take this presentation to this point because I know there's investors involved, is I want to shift some mindsets around blockchain, and deploying it for education is not just about putting it into the existing businesses and making the businesses more efficient and functioning better. Yes, they'll be part of that 1.79 trillion growth in GDP. But if we put 1% of investment back into education into Africa, can you imagine the manifest growth in GDP that we would get there, rather than it being just in business itself? So it's just a shift in the conversation, and we do definitely need to move towards having a national and an international strategy around education about blockchain and how it will impact business and how business can use the technology and deploy the technology. And that is certainly something that I'll be working on, and in the next few months coming. So thank you very much for your time. 20 minutes goes very, very fast. Please reach out for those that would like to know more about those projects, and enjoy the benefits that it reaps. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Lisa, for joining us and giving us your valuable time today at the World Blockchain Summit.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.